My name is Roberto Barrios. I'm a professor of anthropology in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology at the University of New Orleans. I'm also the director of Latin American Studies and the Doris Emery Stone Chair of Latin American Studies at the University of New Orleans. I've been doing projects on disaster recovery since 1999, so I think that's 25 years now. It has certainly involved working with people who are in extremely vulnerable situations. I inherent to tell their stories and to try to represent them as best as possible. I think going back to my first project, it was in Honduras, southern Honduras, in the aftermath of Hurricane Mitch. I was working with people who would be called gente de clase obrera, working class people from very marginalized neighborhoods along the riverbanks. I think going to the American Anthropological Association Code of Ethics about representation, that you should always take into consideration questions of power, issues of power, and you should always err on the side of protecting those who are most disempowered in a particular situation. And those were the people that I was working with at the time. In this particular site, people who I interviewed reported that more people died as a result of reconstruction aid that had not been properly thought out, either to consider the environmental conditions of the site or the social conditions of the site. Street gang violence exploded in the community as a result primarily of the social fragmentation that took place from community reconstruction practices on the part of the municipality, and planners did not take into consideration the very important social relations amongst men, amongst women, between men and women in the community, in these particular working class neighborhoods that did things like provided neighborhood security and also provide women with assistance with childcare. So working with these folks, I knew that working in a very vulnerable neighborhood where certainly things that could raise eyebrows were happening. There was violence in the community. As an ethnographer, you will always be surprised by the things that people are willing to tell you. People were telling me who had committed a violent act against whom. I had to witness domestic violence in these things. But one of the things that I had to keep in mind is that I had to be very careful about how I represented this community and understanding that the ultimate root causes of behaviors that may be considered unpalatable, antisocial, were really the product of broader structural historical forces. So revealing who had committed these acts, reporting people who committed these acts to authorities was really not going to do any good. It was actually going to harm those who were already the victims of long-standing historical processes of vulnerability. It was really telling stories that pointed to these broader issues of power, power relations, and also of the kinds of epistemological perspectives, the kinds of discourses of modernization and of neoliberal capital that were imposed upon disaster survivors that were actually prolonging the long-term impacts of the disaster itself on them. That was really the place of praxis, the place where interventions has to be made. So I think you always have to consider, again, the maxim of anthropology of not doing any harm, being very careful, understand it as a power position of people. I think that's from a very kind of ethical, analytical perspective. Then there's the other more empathetic, affective perspective. I ended up writing a book about affect and emotions that I always developed profoundly felt relationships with the people who I work with and I represent. And that also carries another responsibility of doing these people justice and their stories justice and how you retell them, understanding that all human beings are fallible and we all have complex personalities and histories, but also understanding that what you want to address are these kind of broader processes, again, of power, political economy, ideology that end up doing harm to people.